Hey everyone, this is Gary Key. Welcome to episode 5 of Fish Recon Podcast.
In a world where predators lurk below the water's surface, humanity has been left searching for answers on how to catch these creatures. Now, two men set out to solve the mysteries of fishing and to share that information with you. So get ready as Gary Key and Jimmy Savoini bring you Fish Recon Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to Fish Recon Podcast. We are glad to have you. I'm Gary Key.
And I'm Jimmy Savoini.
And Jimmy, you know what I love about tournament bass fishing, which leads obviously to professionalism?
What is it, Gary Key?
Anybody can do it, right? So, when I look at myself, you've known me for a long time. I'm 5'10", and I weigh all of $150. There's no chance in the world that I would have ever been a professional hockey player or a professional football player. So I was physically limited out the gate. But when it comes to professional fishing, whether you're a guide or you run charter boats like Captain Chuck White, whom we'll be interviewing in an upcoming episode, or you're a Bassmaster Elite Series guy, there's not really a physical limitation or age limitation.
No, that's a great point. And I suppose that it leads certain of us to that end, that we have this competitive juice. I played baseball through a little bit in college and played a lot of different physical sports. I too had some qualities that were good, but was never going to make it in those pro levels. Fishing is one of those sports that now I'm not going to say there's no physical demand at all, because I believe that bass fishing specifically has now become a sport that definitely you have to be physically active, physically fit. I won't say you have to be in super shape like an NFL football player or an NHL hockey player, but you have to have there are physical attributes. But you're right. It's like golf too. Again, the guys have gotten more fit over the years, but golf is something that marries the mind with the body to a sport that and also has some longevity built into it. As long as you can catch fish on a rod and reel, you can be competitive. If you're that good at it, you can be competitive, right?
Yep, and I think that's what attracts a lot of people to tournament bass fishing. There's a lot of people across the United States and even other countries that are really into tournament bass fishing. I'm one of them, not so much anymore as I was a few years ago. And probably for yourself the same, but a lot of people, a lot of young people, a lot of older people really are consumed with tournament bass fishing, and maybe not necessarily trying to go to the Elite Series or the FLW Tour, but local team tournaments and whatnot. There's just a lot of people that are into that.
Why do you suppose that is, Gary? We're touching on it. Aside from the physical, I guess freedom that comes with that, or the ability to do it with not being a top level physical person or having the speed or the skill set. Why do you suppose bass fishing as a tournament sport, as an industry, has become what it is?
I've got a few theories, and I'm sure you knew that. That's why you asked me the question. One of them is that in tournament bass fishing, a lot is left up to your own creativity and your own style. So, if you're a hockey player, you kind of got to come in and play the game the way it has to be played. If you're a football player, you got to come in and you got to play the game the way it needs to be played in a team setting, whatnot. Tennis the same way. But in fishing, you can kind of adapt your own style and still find success. And we see that on the Elite Series, right? We see guys like Kevin Van Dam who are extreme power fishermen. And we see other guys like Mike McClellan who like to drag jigs and everybody in between. So I think that's what attracts people. It allows them to be competitive, allows them to compete at a high level, sometimes pro-am events or team events, allows them to make a little money if they're successful, but it lets them be creative and adapt their own style. No two fishermen are alike, right?
Well, and there you go. And so I've done a lot of seminars and talked to lots of people about bass fishing, and you have as well. And over the years, I've developed a thought about bass fishing and why it is so unique and why it can be so inclusive. Is I dubbed it the ultimate marriage between art and science, meaning, you've got bodies of water, there's biology, there's ecology, there's there's hard science facts that we think about when we go bass fishing, and we try to figure out what the fish are doing. And we've got water temperatures, we've got water clarities, we've got different kinds of bodies of water. It can be a river, it can be a reservoir, it can be a natural lake. And so I've always said these fish behave the way they behave. They're a living creature, and they choose to eat or don't. And we can, so when you've got a situation where you have a sport that's based around science and biology, but you have to apply a certain artistry to it, I really believe that's why it's an individual deal. I mean, and those that are the most successful at applying an artistic ability, I mean art, thinking outside of the box, coming up with new and innovative ways, applying a finesse or a hard line approach, a power approach, it is left to the individual to determine how they will apply their interpretation of that biological water. And I think it's the ultimate marriage of art and science. I really believe that.
Yeah, and I'm going to tease a little bit here, but we've got a great guest coming on here after a little while, and I'm always fascinated to hear people's stories. I'm always fascinated to hear how people got into tournament fishing to begin with, and what drives them. And we've seen it over the years that some people have a lot more drive to success than others. So some people come into it, I wouldn't say flippantly, but more casually than others. And some people are just very, very serious, and some people are very, very focused. And this gentleman that we're going to be talking to later, I would say, is very, very focused, very, very well spoken, and very professional.
Well, and it's interesting that how he came about his passion and drive specifically for the sport of bass fishing is a great story, and I'm excited to talk to him about it. He's been a friend of both of ours for a long time. I've watched him rise straight out of basically downtown LA. I mean, an urban setting where fishing wasn't really a way of life like it might be on the Great Lakes or, next to the ocean. He did fish the ocean a lot, but, he didn't grow up specifically around fishing and have fishing totally inundated into his life. So, again, it's a testament to, and why bass fishing has become the sport it has is I think it's available to anybody that makes a determination that they're going to go chase a dream. And now the industry is strong enough, I mean, it's viable that people can make a living if they can be successful at it and apply the artistry to the science and make it work for them. They can actually make a really good living and a career out of professional bass fishing. And so, yeah, I mean, having him on tonight and talking to him about where he came from and how he does things, I think is a very interesting story and something I'm excited to delve into with him.
I think one of the things I'm most interested in talking to him about is, and you and I have discussed this at length multiple times, in that it is very, very difficult to win a Pro-Am tournament. It just is. And I've never won one. And as far as I know, you've never won one. We've got friends who are on the Elite Series who have never won one, and these are guys that fish full-time and always fish Pro-Am tournaments that have yet to actually win one. And our guest tonight has not only won one, he's won multiple, and he's won back-to-back. Now, he didn't get there without a lot of trials and turmoil and battling, but he crossed that line and shattered that line, and I'm anxious to talk to him a little bit about what it was. What was that defining moment that took him right over the edge and on to success?
Well, and right, and it's very interesting to find out from him how that happened for him. And I would say that probably every professional, semi-pro, people that have fished at a high level and fished what you call Pro-Am tournaments, meaning, pros against pros, fishing against one another. I liken it a lot to the PGA Tour, the Pro Golf Tour. It's an individual against the course. And here's the thing about winning a tournament. Winning is very, very difficult when you have 200 guys, gals, pros next to you that want the same thing you want. They've honed their skills in their own way, and their approach is unique to in and of themselves, and a lot of them are really, really good at what they do. Same thing with the PGA Tour. You know, these guys, there is winning one major a year, one tournament a year is a success for a lot of those guys on the PGA Tour. But, you know, getting in the money, now the industry has become strong enough that if you can be consistent, and so you'll talk to a lot of these pros, Gary, and what they'll tell you is they want to win, of course. I mean, every time you back your boat in on the ramp and you get in the water, your idea is to win, and you want to do that. But there's sustainability and consistency in making a check. And so you can actually be viable and not win, although, like you said, and again, this all leads to your point of how just very difficult it is to line up all of the factors to actually win. And you and I have experienced our fair shares of success at pretty high levels in bass fishing, and having never won an actual pro-am on a national level, it's very difficult to do, and our guest has been able to do it a few times, and so he's going to share his insight on just what it takes to do that. And I would just say real quickly that everybody that's fished at high levels like that, you know, Bassmaster, FLW type stuff like you and I have done as well, there was probably a moment in time when we decided that this was something that there's a fire that burns. There was a drive. There's something that you could identify as Gary Key that you would say, you know, this was a turning point for me. Jimmy Savoini would say the same thing. I made a decision in the 90s that if I was going to do this competitively, I was going to do it till I couldn't do it anymore. And so there's that, you know, and our guest obviously has a story to tell about that too.
The line is so thin. I mean, the line is so thin between first place and second place oftentimes. I mean, we do occasionally see blowouts in tournaments, but a lot of times, more often than not, it really comes down to ounces, where maybe the difference between first place and 10th place is less than 2 pounds. And there's so many variables, and I would say some are out of your control. You know, one guy catches a fish that had a larger breakfast than the other guy, and that's the difference in an ounce or two. It's just one of those things where the line's so thin, and it's hard to put your finger on it. Yet, there are people, like the gentleman we're going to talk to after a while, who have found that success and have consistently found that success and put themselves over the top.
Well, definitely, and I would say there's the variables you can control and the variables you can't. And what a fish has for breakfast, obviously, that's beyond what we can do. But if you ask these guys consistently, and we're going to do that on a regular basis on this podcast, we're going to talk to these guys about things that they could control that they did or didn't do, and it boils down to two things in my mind: decision making and execution, right? So
execution,
you know,
yep.
Execution, and I can tell you, you know, a lot of us think technically, and we have a lot of bass knowledge, but you're going to hear stories as we delve into, especially the bass fishing world, but you'll see it across all the different genres that we cover, is that there's execution issues. When you take a fishing rod, fishing line, attach a lure to it, tie a knot that you tie by hand, and then go out there and have a fish bite it, and then have to work that fish to the boat. Execution can also be mental, I guess. So I just want to clarify that. But you know, the execution issues are gonna be a story that you're gonna hear a lot. That guys did not get to win a tournament they should have won because they didn't execute properly.
I'm glad you highlighted that part of it is a mental execution. I was fishing, I think you were actually in the tournament, but I fished an FLW tournament on Lake Havasu, and I had a pretty good shaky head bite going. For those listeners that aren't bass or fishermen, it's a finesse type technique with a little ball head and a small plastic trailer. Had a good shaky head bite going. I have for several years. You and I have both sort of shared this back and forth, this little shaky head bite. And I decided, for whatever reason, to try out a new shaky head for this tournament. In practice, I just, I usually try to cap my hooks where I don't hook any fish. So I was getting bites on the shaky head. And so tournament day, I started out with this new shaky head I had never used in a tournament before, and I had never actually even caught fish on it. I mean, I just decided to use them. I thought they looked good, and the science behind them, to me in my mind, made sense. And I went out in this FLW tournament, and I hooked a fish, and I lost it. And I re-rigged my bait, and I'm like, okay, well, that happens. And I hooked another fish, and I lost it. And throughout the course of the day, I lost about 9 fish. And it was during a time of year at Lake Havasu where there weren't a lot of bites, but mentally I didn't execute because I couldn't associate that the fact that I was losing those fish was because of this particular style of shaky head. It wasn't the right style for my style of fishing, and I'm always careful to qualify my style of fishing because every angler's hook set is a little bit different. Our style of when we set the hook, how much power we put behind it, whether we set up, whether we set to the side, everything's just uniquely different. And this shaky head may work perfectly for another angler, but for my style and the way I was doing, I kept losing fish, and I was too stubborn to change until the next day. But by then, and in a multi-day Pro-Am tournament, the next day is too late. So I didn't make the decision fast enough. I was foolish for trying a new style, something I had never used before, in a Pro-Am tournament. I should have went with the shaky heads that I've always used and never had any problems with, and allowed time to try the new ones during a practice or during a fun fishing day. And it cost me. I don't think it cost me the win. I wasn't on winning fish. I'm convinced that it cost me a check in that tournament. And as you know, when you spend a lot of money and all the fuel that you spend and practice days and hotel costs, getting a check is the difference between, driving home happy and driving home sad.
Well, I mean, there's success in a check. I have a news flash for you. 9 lost fish in any tournament on any day is going to cost you. But
it's because of my own stubbornness, right? I had the bites, and I'm convinced that if I were using the shaky head I had always historically used, maybe I don't lose 9, maybe I lose 2, but I still have a pretty solid limit. These were all good, 3-pound smallies. I probably come in with 14, 15 pounds, and I walk out of that tournament with a check. The second day, I smartened up. I changed the shaky head back to the old style, and I didn't lose any fish, and I had a pretty solid day. But it kind of keys into what you had mentioned before, that it's not just physical execution, it's mental. And in this case, I wasn't physically executing because I was mentally hung up. I was stubborn. The stubborn was the answer. I was too stubborn to change out until the next day.
Well, and I mean, sometimes hindsight, Gary, is 20/20 too, and you piece it all together. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've left a city and didn't do as well as I wanted to, and I knew everything I did wrong while I was hitting the edge of the city limits headed home. I had it all figured out. I mean, so sometimes we can't see these things as they're happening, and it plays to what I said before. I mean, you've got all these variables and all these factors that make a difference in high-level tournament fishing, and decision-making and execution problems. I mean, it's that thin line, like you say, and it happens in golf too when guys hit 10 feet right of the fairway and end up bogeying a hole or parring a hole that they needed one birdie to make that cut or to get on to the final day. So it's a one stroke here, one stroke there, a shaky head here, and a lost fish there. And so it's just one of those situations where this is a very interesting sport. Art, science. I beat that drum all the time. Art married to science, and we're about to find out from an urban kid who grew up in L.A., who's seen a lot of fish and a lot of fishing success and made a career in the fishing industry because of his success. We're about to get some insight from a guy I'm really excited to talk to.
Well, I'm also excited to talk to him, and one of the things that I admire most about him is that he has made a career out of professional fishing while still remaining local and having a normal job, right? So it's not like, he's gone out to the Elite Series or the FLW Tour. He's doing fine just where he's at, and he's making a lot of money, and I'm excited to talk to him. So coming up after this quick little break is Joe Uribe Jr.
Stay tuned, everybody. Gary and Jimmy will be right back.
All right, online with us now we have Bridgford bass professional Joe Uribe Jr. Joe, thank you for joining our podcast.
Well, thank you, Gary. Appreciate you having me.
It is our pleasure, and we got a lot to talk about with you, Joe. You've had a lot of success, and one of the things we want to touch on in the podcast is a little bit about those fine lines that make the difference between having success and not having success. But maybe to kick us off, maybe share with our listeners how you got started in fishing in general and when you transitioned over to bass fishing and tournament fishing.
Well, it actually started at a very young age. Fishing and hunting and outdoors was just in my blood, and all my family, they just grew up doing that. So, I started at a young age fishing saltwater, fishing off the pier. I grew up in Long Beach, California, where I was born and raised. My grandparents lived in Hawthorne, California, so they're really close to the beach. We fished the piers, Hermosa Pier, Redondo Beach Pier, and that's kind of what got me hooked on fishing in general. I mean, at that point, when you're saltwater fishing, anything that swims, you want to catch it. And, as I grew up and became a teenager and stuff, and then started getting more focused on the freshwater scene and introduced to that, when I was probably about 13, my dad actually at the time worked for Hughes Aircraft, which later became Boeing, and they had a bass club there. And he actually joined the bass club, got involved in that for a year, and was really excited about it, and wanted me to be a part of it. So it was kind of hard getting me my foot into the door because I was still so young. So for liability and insurance reasons, I mean, they weren't really wanting to get me into the club just for liability. But that my dad talked him into letting me go in as an observer, fishing with him. And the guys really got to know me. And it's like, this kid's young, but he handles himself very well, very professional. And, we don't have to babysit him like we thought. So they went ahead and allowed me to be a member of the club at age 14, which obviously I was a non-boater at the time. And first year, fished a complete season in the back of the boat and won Angler of the Year, believe it or not, out of the back of the boat. Huge accomplishment. So obviously I went into that club showing that I had something to prove, because being a kid, again, I mean, I didn't want me to be a burden on these other anglers' boats. So, I really felt like I had a lot to prove as a young adolescent. But, I was very successful young. I was like a sponge. I just consumed all the information I could. Never forget, in 1991, when I won Angler of the Year, Rich Tauber actually awarded me the Angler of the Year title that year and spoke at our club banquet. And very great speaker, gave me an idea where I'm like, you know what, that's what I want to do. Not only do I want to fish well, but I do want to speak well too. And, after that, shortly after in school, I signed up for speech therapy classes and stuff. And that really helped me kind of break the shell early. Obviously being young, you're real, shy on the mic. You're really not really eager to talk in front of a crowd, but really helped break the ice for me at a young age. So I was really fortunate that I took that opportunity.
Well, it definitely worked. You're a stand-up guy and very well spoken. I've seen you on TV and videos and heard you talk, so definitely worked. What was some of the craziest things you caught off the pier? I assume pier fishing can be pretty good at times, but also pretty crowded at times.
It could be. It's almost kind of like combat fishing, especially on the weekends when we'd go out there. But, we would catch shovel-nosed shark. Every now and then, actually, yellowtail and bonita would come through and stuff. And, it's funny because on the pier, you're so high up off the water, you hooked a real big fish. You actually had to walk it down all the way down the pier to the actual beach and beach the fish. That was kind of interesting. But, again, just a lot of fun. And obviously, you always got to spend time with my grandfather and my dad. So a very family-oriented sport for me at a young age. And I was very fortunate to have that early on in my life because, as Jimmy and I talked earlier about, I grew up kind of in a rough neighborhood. I grew up in North Long Beach, California, and, a lot of gangs and a lot of poverty. So I just was around a lot of that, but really didn't get exposed to it as much for the fact because I was always busy with either school or fishing. On the weekends, on days off of school, my dad and I were always either, going to the lakes or going to the pier. When he wasn't available and he couldn't take time off of work, I would, walk or ride my bike over to the local park and go catch bluegill. I mean, whatever it was, again, at that age, fishing absolutely consumed my life. And I'm very fortunate that it did at a young age because it also kept me out of trouble too and gave me a purpose early on. I set goals for myself at a young age. And obviously now, as you can see, I've accomplished a lot of those goals I set.
It seems like as every year goes by and every generation goes by, there are more things to distract us and distract what we now call our children. And Jimmy and I were recently talking about, and that's one of the missions of Fish Recon is to try to draw kids in and get them more focused on fishing. But now with video games and electronics and iPhones at your disposal, it's becoming harder and harder. So really appreciate you taking the time to share your story because it's inspiring and we want kids to get more involved in fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got twin boys myself. They're both Lucas and Antonio are 12 years old right now. So, they're at the age where, you've got, iPads and video games and all that stuff that, they're more eager to get more involved in because their friends are doing that too. So, but yeah, it's something that I'm working on right now as a parent now.
Well, of course. And real quick, Joe, you mentioned, so I'm just curious, there's a fire that got lit in you, and you referenced, your early age participation in the bass club and your success there, and that probably fostered some of the competition for you. But was your passion for fishing really fostered? And obviously, your dad had influence in that. He helped you with that and those kind of things. But something was burning. A flame was burning inside of Joe Uribe Jr. Was that on the pier that you just, or was it kind of a combination between the bass club, freshwater stuff, and your success there? Or your fishing experiences? Did you know early on that you wanted to make a career out of fishing?
I really didn't. When I was fishing the pier, that was just fishing and spending time with my grandfather and just learning as much as I could and enjoying everything, all the surroundings around me. But when I joined the bass club is when I really started getting that competitive bug and listening to speakers like Rich Tauber, who had just recently won the U.S. Open at that time. Really gave me a whole different purpose and outlook on fishing, and really kind of switched my gears on just fishing in general to just specifically targeting freshwater largemouth bass and smallmouth at the time. But so that kind of really gave me the bug early to really want to it's like I had to prove that to myself that I wanted to do this and I wanted to be the best at it. The tournament scene, when I started fishing team tournaments with my dad, was when I was able to drive. I got my permit at 15 years old, was able to drive at 16 and able to operate the boat. So I was super excited about that. So, taking on that kind of responsibility of operating the boat, running the boat and operating a vehicle. I mean, it was a big responsibility, but it was something at that particular time I was definitely, willing to, or able to go ahead and do and overcome and control that. And, again, it's just something that the tournament scene for me when I started at a young age. I mean, the bass club really kind of set my foundation for bass fishing. And then the team tournaments, going out there and fishing team tournaments with my dad and being very successful at it and winning money. I mean, I was in high school, as a freshman. And I mean, I go out on the weekend and for 6 to 8 hours of fishing and, get $2,500 check. I mean, as a kid, I was super excited. I'm thinking, wow, I want to do this. I don't want to have to go to work. I'll just go bass fish. But, so that kind of really gave me that encouragement to kind of stay focused on that and go that direction.
It sounds like you were pretty used to combat fishing from the pier. I was just envisioning you hooking into a yellowtail and not only having to walk down the pier and down the steps all the way down the beach to land it, but having to go through all those people that are elbow to elbow along that pier.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like, they would follow you. Everybody was pretty courteous, but they'd follow you. They're excited to see what you had hooked up because a lot of them didn't know. And you had a lot of passerbys just kind of observing and stuff. So had quite the crowd. So I was, again, putting on a show for them at that point, kind of like how I've done the last couple of years in the FLW as well.
Well, definitely. And now looking, down the road, and I just looked up your statistics real quick, and obviously we've faced each other, Gary, as well, in the FLW world, Forest Elwood fishing tournaments that we fish. You're at nearly 400,000. You've managed to win 3 of these tournaments. And, a lot of the people that we hang around with, they realize how hard it is to win these kind of tournaments and come as far as you've come and paid the dues that you've paid. And that's just with FLW 400 grand won. I venture to say you're well over $700,000 in winnings, and you work at Cabela's. Fishing has become your life out of what you've dedicated yourself to from a young age. Tell us a little bit about the pathway with FLW and the successes that have come that way.
How I started really when I really started getting serious and when I first started fishing as a pro or as a boater was in 2003. I took a year off of high school, or actually off of college. I graduated high school in '97 and worked as a bank teller because most of my aunts were in the banking business, and so I got hired on at Wells Fargo. So I did that, saved up my money for about a year, and that's when Bassmasters came in out west and the invitationals, and I actually went and fished that in '98 and '99. Was very fortunate to be able to do that. Didn't have any sponsors. It was all on my dime, money that I'd saved in team tournaments and then working, of course, and did that. And after I was done for that season, I came back and was not sure what I wanted to do at that point. And then I got approached by Anglers Marine, which is based out of Anaheim, California, a boat dealership there, and they actually called me to come to work for them. So I did in 99, and I've been selling boats and been working in the marine industry ever since. So, I mean, having said that, I mean, that's really kind of made me kind of start having a career, developing a career in the marine industry, not just fishing as a boater professionally, but really as working in the industry as a boat salesman, and being successful at that. Met a lot of great people that helped open up doors. I was able to, get a lot more sponsors that way, being, part of a great company like that, representing great brands like Champion Boats at the time, Ranger Boats, Mercury Outboards. So,
Sure.
A lot of those companies and manufacturers like the fact that, man, this is a young guy from LA area, Hispanic at that, and spoke very well and had stats to back it up. So it was helped open a lot of doors for me. So when I started fishing as a boater in 2003, I started fishing the WAN Bass Pro-Ams, and it really was very fortunate right off the bat the first year to win my very first event that I fished, and won that at Lake Mead. And that really, at that point in time, I knew that's what I wanted to continue doing. Not so much necessarily full time, because I did like my job. I enjoyed selling boats, as I still do now to this day. But being able to do both, selling boats and fishing professionally, was a huge opportunity for me. And also as a young adult at that point, starting a young family too, that really helped set forth a whole different foundation for me to be able to provide for my family and still do what I love to do. So, I fished, again, WAN Bass. I fished that from 2003 to 2005 and 2006. Well, when the FLW National Guard started in 2007, that was a huge opportunity for West Coast anglers. It was a lot of money at the time. It was $4,000 entry fee. So at that point in time, that's something I knew I wanted to do, but to attain that, I had to pursue sponsors and not product. I'm talking financial sponsorship. So I was very fortunate to actually meet a gentleman here in Arizona at the time that I drew the year before in a WAN Bass tournament as a AAA. He was a home builder here in Arizona out of Whitman, and we hit it off very, very well, kept in contact, and he agreed to go ahead and sponsor me for that first season in FLW for 2007. And that was the main reason how I got started in FLW. So I was very fortunate to meet him, have the opportunity to meet him, build a great friendship, and also a sponsorship at the same time. So, and I just was hooked at that point, because that year in 2007, I was very fortunate, the last event, to make my very first top 10 the first year, and was on TV live, competed against Tim Klinger, Brett Hyde, Brent Ayler, Andre Moore, Jay Ellis. And it was a huge humbling experience for me, because these were obviously very well-established fishermen and icons of our sport. So to be able to have that opportunity early on fishing FLW was huge for me. It kind of set my fishing career in FLW and continued to open up new doors for future sponsors at that time.
There are a lot of people, myself, Jimmy, who fish Pro-Am tournaments, have for a number of years. I don't so much anymore. We have friends on the Elite Series that fish every single Elite Series and have never won one. I mean, they've never won a big Pro-Am tournament. They may be second place in several top tens and whatnot, but you've won at that level. And not only have you won, you've won multiple times, and you've won back-to-back. What is it that you think makes that difference of going to that next level of actually being a champion? What do you think leads to that?
Well, the one thing, too, is it wasn't something where I just got involved in the bass fishing the first year and started setting the world on fire. I mean, like I said, I started at a young age, and I was very fortunate to meet a lot of great anglers and legends and icons of our sport as a young age during boat shows, during seminars, and even during events. So, again, I was like a sponge, and I talked to all of them and got as much information as I could to help develop my style of fishing and how I like to fish and how I approach each individual tournament and lake. And the biggest thing for me was to kind of get over those Pro-Am jitters, so to speak. When you get as a first-time boater, and even non-boater at that, I mean, you're floating out there in the middle of the marina in the morning, and you've got 150-plus boats out there. I mean, a lot of guys get real nervous, and that's when your mental game comes into play. So I really was able to overcome that at an early age because I started young. So that kind of helped. I kind of already got over that major hurdle and was more focused, knowing my abilities as an angler, my instincts, and just do what I do and not worry about anybody else out there. Because again, when I started, nobody knew who I was when I started fishing pro-ams, really. So I was kind of under the radar, so to speak. So I was able to go out there at the lake and do what I do. And I was a real fishy dude. I mean, I fished a lot at that particular time, and my instincts were very keen. I was young, I was aggressive, my stamina, everything was great, so everything was on point. But the one thing that I did was analyze the lakes and analyze the top 10, the consistent top 10 anglers at that particular time. I mean, it was to the point where I had stats written down on who did what and what their style of fishing was. So when it came to fishing an event, and say after the first day, there was a particular angler that was leading the tournament, or a couple of them that were in the top 10, and I knew, you know what, those guys are worm fishermen, or those guys are power fishermen, or I kind of knew what they were doing before the stats were even posted. So that kind of helped piece the puzzle together for me as well. I'm a very observant angler, and that's one thing that I still am to this day, and really observant on my surroundings, conditions, other boaters around, and just my instincts, and just making the adjustments is the biggest thing. A lot of anglers I know, they base a lot of their tournaments off of their pre-fish, but I don't. I can tell you from experiences, you know, I've had great practices, and those a lot of times end up being my worst tournaments. So I never let my practice dictate what I do and the outcome of the tournament. So I've had some of my worst practices actually end up being my best finishes. So, you know, again, what the main thing I can tell anglers is just, you know, really try to focus on your abilities, your strong points, and get your mental game together as far as staying focused on what you do, and don't let the doc talk get to you, because there's a lot of that out there, and that'll really play game tricks with your mind and your strategy of what you had initially planned. It'll kind of really unravel your whole game plan come the first day of the tournament.
I'm really glad you shared that, because we've all experienced, I mean, there's a lot of guys that have the tournament won in practice. Right? I mean, you come first day of practice and guys are on 20, 30 pounds. I mean, and I'm sure some of it's embellished, but and it seems like more often than not, those guys that talk about how great a practice they had or have, they end up not being in the top. And it makes you always wonder. It's like, wow, how did you go from being on 20 pounds a day to, 10 pounds a day? But I'm really glad you shared that, because it's really good information. That you go into the tournament more or less with an open mind of, hey, conditions change, and I need to adapt and adjust, and I can't base my tournament off my pre-fish. So appreciate you sharing that. I know that's going to be valuable for a lot of our listeners.
Well, and Gary and I call it, fishing the moment. We've talked about it for years, and I think it comes with experience and obviously your perceptions of those kind of situations where, the fish act differently all the time. Fishing the moment and the ability to separate yourself from all of those kind of things. I mean, the external factors to really dial it down. But, your instincts and fishing the moment and those kind of things, I think that's what you're touching on there. And that's a big part of success in tournament angling. I mean, especially in multi-day tournaments where the conditions are constantly changing. And you may not be able to get to an area or a spot that you thought that you found fish on because there was other anglers, and you're constantly having to adjust with things that are right in front of you at that time, right?
That is correct, Jimmy. And again, when I started in 2007 fishing FLW, again, I was fortunate to make a top 10 my first season and make the championship. But after that point, I was very consistent, and I did, I was always aware of that, and that was always my main goal, is being consistent, trying to make that top 10, obviously catching 5 a day, which, as you know, Jimmy, a lot of lakes that we go to, that's an accomplishment in itself. But, for many years, I struggled with not sealing the deal, and that was a big hurdle on my back for many years. And I think a lot of it had to do with myself putting too much pressure on myself, not so much my sponsors or my family. It was myself in general, really. I was my worst enemy at the time, really, kind of like I said. You and I both been knocking at the door many a times in these events, and it's just, man, when you're done with these tournaments, you're like, gosh, what do I have to do to win one of these events? And it was really honestly wearing on me. And it wasn't until I really just sat back and said, you know what, I almost got to the point where I said, you know what, I'm done. I'm not going to, if it hasn't happened now, it's not going to happen. I was to that point. You know, I've had so many seconds and thirds and fourths, and I mean, not to be ashamed by any mean and stuff, but I was just like, gosh, I want to win one of these so bad. And it wasn't until 2015 where I just said, you know what, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. I left it in God's hand, and I was very faithful to him. And I said, you know what, when it's my time, I'll be ready. And if I'm not going to have my turn, then it is what it is. But I'm going to go out there and enjoy myself, have fun doing it, and do what I love to do. And it wasn't until that it was like I was able to take a deep breath and just let it be. And all of a sudden, I won one. And I was like, wow, that's all I had to do. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I thought you were going to say, you know, Jimmy, as you know, catching five and being consistent, that's what you want to do. And as you know, it's been really hard for you for a while to do that. So I thought that's where we were headed. So I'm glad we ended up where we ended up.
No problem. Like I said, it's it's a great sport. And one thing, and Jimmy is the same. And I know by talking to him and seeing him and what his accomplishments are in the company and the brands that he represents. But we're all very passionate about the sport of bass fishing, and we do all we can to protect it. You know, again, I mean, FLW has given us West Coast anglers a great opportunity to not only fish at the highest level, but to promote our sponsors, to promote ourselves, and give us an opportunity to make some money fishing. I mean, none of us are getting rich or making a living doing this here on the West Coast, but you know what? We have something that we can call ours as far as fishing pro events. We have the Wild West series that's now here on the West Coast, which a lot of us are super excited about. And, you know, it just, you know, there's been some organizations that have come and gone. So, I mean, there's a lot of change in the marine industry. There's some change going on currently as we speak, but, you know, it's all for the better. And we have to do our part as anglers to protect our sport and to help promote our sport and get new anglers involved. And what I've always tried to do, because, again, with my testimony being that I started at a very young age, is trying to get the youth and more involved, because that is the future of our sport. You know, my kids' kids, I mean, that's the future that we need to continue to focus on as well, and give them a strong, solid foundation to be able to fish and continue on with the legacy.
It literally changes lives. And you know, again, now you've come full circle with really one of the main drivers of Fish Recon and what we want to do. And we want to tell stories like yours to, okay, so yeah, we got down the professional road, and Joe, you've made a lot of money doing it. You're making a career out of fishing, but literally at the ties that bind here are the young age that we can introduce children to fishing and a way of life that is really, really unique, but can really do so much. It offers career opportunities if people want to go down that road, but it also offers a break from a tough world. It offers so many things to these young people. And that's one of the focuses, Gary and I, on Instagram. And, you know, we love to post pictures of kids. We love to talk to kids. And I know you do that with your seminars and the things you do. Children are the future of the sport, but it also it is literally life-changing for a lot of kids. And that's why, you know, when you get to where you're at, you've won a lot. You've done a great job at what you do. You promote your sponsors. You always turn it back towards the kids. And that's a big deal for us. It really is.
Tell us a crazy fish story. What's something that's happened out with you on the water? The big one that got away, or maybe you caught the wrong kind of fish, or something happened. What's been one of the more exciting events that have occurred in your fishing career?
I've had a lot of exciting moments and stuff and last minute heroics, but you know, the one that I will never forget, and obviously a lot of anglers, you know, that have had the opportunity to win like that, is my very first Pro-Am, and that was a Juan Bass Pro-Am that I won in 2003. You'll never forget that very first win. And I mean, when I went out there, again, not having any idea that I was going to even have an opportunity to win, but I did find a pretty solid pattern and in an area that I had really didn't have a lot of experience in. But when that first day of that tournament started and I made that long run and I got to my spot and everything just started clicking, I mean, I was just very in sync with what was going on. Watching the birds, watching the shad, watching the stripers move the shad and the largemouth following them. And, you know, I'd never forget that day. There was a couple opportunities that could have went the other way. I mean, I had fish that I had pinned, had hooked, hung in a tree, and literally come off in the air, and my co-angler reach out and get them in the air with a net. I had one fish in particular as well that I flipped in out of a tree, that came at me fast coming at the boat. I'm trying to pick up line, and it's coming right at the boat, comes up, shakes, comes off, literally comes off. My co-angler has the net in the water, and the fish swims right into the net. And at that point, we both looked at each other, and I said, man, I think it's my turn. And I mean, it was unbelievable. That was the first day. Then the second day, went out there and had an entourage of boats follow me up there to the area I was fishing and watching every pitch and flip that I made. And it turned off. The area, the fish had moved. Everybody was so locked into where I was. So I literally motored to the other side of that bay and started following these fish again. And I started catching them. And having guys like Art Berry watch me as they were doing the same thing I was, but watching me stick these fish. And they just looked at me and says, dude, it's your time to shine. He goes, you're winning this thing. And I said, no. I was a very humble guy, and I still am, but I'm like, no, there's no way. And he's like, dude, I'm telling you, you're going to win this event. And I'll never forget that long boat ride back to the weigh-in, just with tears in my eyes, looking up at the sky and giving grace to God, thinking, man, this could be it. This really could be it, but still not trying to get my hopes up. But when I went in and I won by 2 pounds. And I mean, everybody was so excited. I was in shock in the parking lot. I didn't know what to do or how to handle myself, really. And it wasn't until, my dad was there, of course, because he fished the event. But it wasn't until we called my mom in the parking lot to let her know I had won. And that's when it really set in. And both my dad and I just cried like babies.
Well, when it's meant to be, it's meant to be, right? I mean, Jimmy and I talk about it all the time. I mean, there's some tournaments where nothing you do goes right. And there's other times where it just seems like no matter what you do, you can't go wrong. And Jimmy and I had a Lake Pleasant. Do you remember that one night tournament we fished, Jimmy? And I hate night tournaments. I mean, my eyes are bad as it is. And when I cast and all I'm doing is listening for a splash to make sure that I hit water, I'm not having a good time. And we're at Pleasant at a night tournament, and Jimmy's nose hooking. He's got this little tiny number one, looks like a little trout fly hook, nose hooking a drop shot worm. He hooks an 8-pounder. It's pitch black. I'm trying to hold the light and the net at the same time, and the fish literally jumps over the net. It comes out of the water, jumps all the way over the net, goes back down. I mean, we're just going crazy, and we ended up getting this fish in the boat.
7-pound test, dude. Well, that was hilarious. Gary screaming. He tried everything he could do. It was almost 9 pounds. He tried to beat it off with the net. I mean, it's just like, hey,
I couldn't see a thing. I couldn't see a thing.
Never mind, Gary. It's a 7-pound test. Do whatever you want. I mean, we're good here. Whatever. But it was crazy. Well, you never forget the first time you win, for sure. But really backing up just a real quick minute, you touched on something a minute ago. I wanted to kind of revisit when you told me, that you'd had all these good finishes, and you'd really considered walking away or dialing it back, as it were, from the sport because it's so hard to win. And you and I had actually talked about, you were looking into the insurance business. You were looking into maybe getting into something else. You got 2 boys, you got a family, you got to support your kids and family. And you were actually looking at getting kind of out of fishing because it is demanding and there is no guarantees. We talked to Josh Bertrand a little bit about the non-guarantees of fishing and the gambles we take. And so, at one point in time, you were ready to give it up and maybe not just give it up, because I say it's in your blood. You never give it up completely. You can't walk away from it. But, you were thinking about a career change for a while.
Yeah, that's correct. And that was in 2000 and late 2012, early 2013, when I was actually making the move from Southern California here to Arizona, was the biggest reason for that. And just going to take a year off, a step back, just to kind of get established here in Arizona. Working for Cabela's, is what I ended up doing, but really was viewing more towards getting out of the industry, kind of doing something a little bit different. I always want to be in sales, but, I met Ty Al early on, and he was helping me get on board with Liberty Mutual at the time, and I went through the whole hiring process and was going to get hired on at his office. But it wasn't really till Bridgford Foods approached me and said, hey, we really want you to represent our company here on the West Coast. And that really helped me kind of stay focused on fishing and giving me another opportunity to be able to fish at that level and not have to worry so much financially about, man, am I going to be able to make enough to fish the next event? So that was very fortunate that I was able to do that. I ended up not taking the position with Liberty Mutual for the fact that I wasn't going to be allowed the time to be able to fish as much as Bridgford needed me to be there and represent them. So I stayed in the marine industry. I got hired on with Cabela's there in Glendale, and been a great company to work for, great crew of guys there. And I'm sure glad I stuck with it, because then again, the next season, I mean, I was out there, and it took me a little while. I mean, trying to get, I never had a wrapped boat before, never had all those sponsors like that. So it really threw me for a loop the first season in 2014, out there. So, I didn't have a great season in 2014, but 2015, I said, okay, you know what? We need to focus, and we need to just go out and have fun with it. Don't worry about pressure sponsors and all that. Just go do what you do. Go do what Joe does out there on the water. And I did. And I put on quite a show in 2015, and it was amazing not only to have that success in 2015, but have such great sponsors and companies backing me. And I was just so blessed to have that. And not only did I win, but they won. And it was just a great year in 2015, and kind of kept the momentum going. I mean, 2016, I kicked off the season with the top 10, and then in 2017, this year, kicked off with another win. So just kind of hoping to keep that same momentum going.
Well, and I wanted to share real quick, and I'm glad you touched on that, because I had some friends in the insurance industry, and we talked about it, and you'd actually talked to some of them, and then they kept calling me and say, hey, what's up with Joe? What's going on? Does he want to do this, or can we? And I said, guys, I want to be honest with you, and that's after you started, your star sort of started to rise, so to speak. And I said, I got to tell you, I think he's headed in a different direction. And I really felt even then, and I didn't share it with you, but I told those guys, I said, Joe's really a professional bass fisherman guy. I mean, he'd be great at the insurance game, and I think he'd be good at anything he did. But I really feel like his career is moving in a different direction, and he's got to be available for, you were starting to get the sponsors lined up. And I just told him, I said, look, I really think he's headed in a different direction. So I felt like you were headed that way. And like you say, God has his plan, and he does what he'll do. And so, I really saw you headed that way. And on that, I have to ask you, you have to tell the story of the last day of the first Havasu win, when you smashed up all those big fish. And I mean, tell us about that day. I mean, that's another story I want to hear. I mean, I've watched it a bunch of times and I've seen it, but tell it from your perspective to our listeners about that day and how that all transpired.
Well, again, I mean, I'm a very humble guy, but I can tell you, going into that final day, I couldn't sleep that night. I mean, I remember being there at the top 10 meeting the day before with all the guys, and Ron Lappin went through all the instructions and everything of, how everything was going to get played out. And I remember him asking us, man, anything you guys want? I mean, any questions you guys have? And I remember looking at him and said, man, could we just get this over with right now? Let's do this right now. So that's when I just knew. I mean, it was definitely my time to shine. I mean, those first 2 days, catching those fish early and catching them as well as I did, and actually stopped catching them because I was like, man, I got to save these fish. But going into that final day, rolling into my first spot, and I had fished the key spot in that cove, but there was an area across the way that I just looked at it, and it just looked good. I hadn't fished there either one of the first 2 days. And I told my co-angler, said, hey, I'm going to kick the trolling motor on high, and I'm going to go across over here. It's just calling my name. And I remember trolling motor across the bay, turning the trolling motor speed down, watching all these spectators watching me, casting up to that bluff wall and catching that 9-pounder right off the bat in the morning. That's when I knew it's over. I mean, it was game on. I said, you know what? Let's just have fun with it. And we absolutely blasted them that day. I mean, every spot I went to, I'd catch a 4 or 5 pounder. I mean, it was just incredible fishing. I mean, just throwing back 3.5 pounders. I mean, at 10 o'clock, when I had 26 pounds in the boat, I stopped fishing because the camera guys wanted to know exactly how much I had and how much that big fish weighed, because they were giving updates, of course. Well, as I sat down weighing my fish, I turned the boat, and I told my I said, here, tie this on, make a cast down these banks, you'll catch them. And I remember watching him catching them. Every fish I weighed, he'd catch one. I'd run down there, net a 3.5-pound smallmouth. I'd go back and weigh another fish. He'd catch one. I mean, when I was done weighing my fish, he had already filled up the boat. He weighed in. He had 16 pounds, and I said, "Dude, it's over. We won this deal, both of us." And just the rest of the day, just went fishing. We just had fun. We just talking to all the spectators and just catching fish. And it was a long day though, because it was like, man, we wanted to go in and weigh in at 10 o'clock, but we had to stay out there till 2:30. But it was a great tournament.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it honestly, and after watching that footage, I mean, I can just imagine what the other anglers were thinking when they saw that. It's like, it was like I was fishing a whole different lake. It was like I was fishing Clear Lake and you guys were fishing Havasu. I mean, that's how dialed in I was on those fish. And my dad and I got dialed in on that early on, but I didn't really know how special we had it till we really fine-tuned the bait that I ended up winning on. And it was unbelievable feeling, knowing that it didn't matter who was around, and they would watch me just pull up, make a couple casts with a swim bait and catch one and move on to the next spot. And as they were just praying for one bite, and they're watching me throw back 4-pounders, and it was an incredible experience. It was a roller coaster that I was able to ride the whole way through the tournament and have fun with it. And that's one thing I enjoyed. I had fun with it the entire tournament. It wasn't the part that I won. It was the fact that I enjoyed the ride, and I had my dad, my sister, my mom, all there watching it happen and unfold. And I was very fortunate to have the FLW had the Ion cameras on the boat, so you guys were able to experience a little bit what I experienced on that final day, and it was a great experience for everyone.
Yeah, there's only about 2 or 3 million people trying to zoom in on that video and figure out what bait you were using.
Yeah. Which is available on at the Fish Recon store, right, Joe, for like $39.99?
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, these last couple other wins since then, we've had technical difficulties with the cameras, so they weren't able to play some of the footage. But the guys, the first event, were the guys that were editing that, Jody White and Kyle, they were, they worked with me on that, and only showing what they showed, just out of respect for myself and the bait that my dad and I put together. And it's a pretty special deal. I mean, my dad and I thought about maybe coming out with it, but you know what? It's one of those things where we'd rather just keep it our little baby, so to speak, and just have fun with it. I mean, I've made over $200,000 on this bait already, and pretty incredible. So it's all timing, right time. I'm really excited to go to the championship this November to Kentucky Lake. I think if the conditions line up the way they should and the fish do what they should that time of the year, I'm really curious to see how they react to that bait.
That'll be exciting. We're looking forward to watching you.
Well, and like you say, that whole bait is surrounded in mystery, and you made a ton of money on it shooting towards Kentucky Lake, which is a big giant pull-through lake. They pull a lot of water. There's a lot of current, a lot of shell beds, those kind of things. My understanding is it's some sort of a bait fish imitator, and if that's the case, then you line that up right. It'd be interesting to see if you can take it across the country all the way coast to coast and see how it goes, but I would imagine it would have the same appeal if you line the correct formula up right, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I was really looking forward to last year when we went to Table Rock, but it was just way too warm. And this is really a kind of a fall time deal, up to maybe early pre-spawn. But when those fish start staging and they start, grouping up on gizzard shad or big threadfin, and up there, you even have, they even have like, the blueback herrings and stuff. I mean, yeah. Again, when those fish suspend and they set up, I mean, it's pretty incredible when you get them on it. And it's kind of similar, like, of course, when the Alabama rig came out, I mean, that was a multi-bait rig that, just attracted a lot of fish. This isn't a multi-bait rig, but this is a bait that you fish at the right speed. And again, you kind of have the presentation, the momentum down, and knowing really what depth the fish are in and just kind of presenting it. It's a real subtle bait, but it's very effective. Hookup ratio is ridiculous on it. And it's just a fun bait to fish. I've got a lot of confidence in it, of course. And I took it over the following year after I won in 2015. I took it over to Lake Shasta. Was excited to see what the spotted bass did with it, and I took fourth in that event on it. Caught every single fish bait, and it was just amazed to see how a spotted bass would able to get that bait in its mouth. So it told me that it was the right speed, the right movement, right presentation, and like Jimmy said, the right formula. So yeah, I mean, just definitely excited to take it to across the country and see if I can duplicate that in a different body of water.
And I think that's one of the amazing things about what you did. And I think it's an education for all of us, because everybody that watched that video, everybody that fishes Havasu regularly, who watched that video, looked at some of those areas you were fishing and said, well, I fished those areas. I pre-fished those areas and I never got a bite. So whatever it is that you are doing is triggering strikes from fish that aren't biting other guys' lures. That's the bottom line. You're doing something that is triggering a response from those fish, and something that sounds like a really good hookup ratio, and that's a recipe for success.
Absolutely. I mean, guys got to see it again this last February when I won this last one again on the final day. Again, all the areas I fished were all community areas, real local, nothing secret to the areas I was fishing, but guys got to watch it in action, and man, it was just incredible. I drew Lon Armel, who is a great friend of Matt Shura and his travel partner. And he was just was able to see that in the back of the boat, and it was pretty incredible. Once when the conditions were right, and they were right on that final day, and boy, it just happened. But again, it's just all about presentation, the profile, and the bait. Because like you said, even that first tournament I won in Havasu in 2015, there was a lot of boats in areas that I wanted to fish that I would slide in there, make a few casts, catch one, and go to the next one. And that's really kind of threw those guys for a loop.
So did you make him sign some sort of a legal document that morning saying, hey, okay, Lon, here, you're going to see this, and you're not allowed to do this, and just sign here, and you already had a notary stamp on it and everything?
Yeah, it was, I've been very fortunate. I mean, I've had the opportunity where a lot of my co's, they've been very respectful when that bait comes out. Most of the time I swing the fish in the boat, and they net them. They don't really get to handle the bait, get close to the bait. And those guys have been really cool about that. I have given them baits that are similar to it. I gave one to Lon, similar to what I was throwing, not exact, but kind of something different. And he caught fish on it right away. And I think a lot of that was just confidence. He's like, wow, okay, I got the bait. And I mean, instantly he started catching fish on it. But I mean, again, just something I just like to, again, keep to myself for as long as I can, just to have a little something. But again, there's nothing special about it. It's not like something I can go every day out there and catch them on it. But when it's the right time and the right conditions, it's pretty fun. It really is. But I'm just looking forward to our final event at Clear Lake. Again, I've kind of set myself up this year again for another shot at Angler of the Year. I'm currently leading the points in FLW. Obviously won the first event at Havasu. I took 5th at the Delta. Clear Lake's the end of September. Great, super fun fishery to fish, and a lot of big bags there. And just hopefully I can, crack another top 10 and lock in another Angler of the Year title and keep that momentum going into the final event or the championship at Kentucky.
Well, we'll be pulling for you, Joe. What's next on your horizon? Where would you like to see yourself in a year? Are you content kind of what you're doing now, or do you have aspirations to take it to another level and, fish the FLW Tour or the Bassmaster Elite Series? What do you look forward to?
Well, I definitely been asked that question a lot the last couple of years, and was kind of been thinking about it. But, it's hard to leave the industry that I've been in for almost 20 years now, and that's the marine industry and selling boats. And, not only am I sponsored by Ranger and Mercury, but I sell Ranger and Mercury. So it's kind of very unique to be not only sponsored by those companies, but actually sell them on the retail level. So I've got a great job, and I'm able to fish for Bridgford here on the West Coast. Would I like to venture out and fish back east and fish the tour? Absolutely. I'm sure a lot of anglers would love to do that. But a lot of us, as Jimmy does as well, I mean, we have obligations. I kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in my plan, so to speak, this year. We just had a baby boy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. His name is Blake, and he's 7 days old today. So, so we kind of got that right now going, which was a great opportunity because I don't have any events going on until the end of September. So she's super supportive of my fishing, though. Just a super great gal, and just is always every one of my events. She's there rooting me on and handing out Bridgford product to all the other top 10 anglers on the final day. So that actually really has helped my fishing a lot too. Having somebody in your corner like that supports you. I mean, I've always had my family in my corner, but to have the one that you love dearly that's there with you by your side, rooting you on, whether you do good or not, but just having her there is definitely helps fuel my fire and my motivation. So, but, we'll see what happens. Like I said, we've got some changes in our marine industry currently going on right now with the merge of Bass Pro and Cabela's. So we'll see once all that's ironed out and all the announcements are made and stuff. Really, we've got our Bridgford team meeting that we'll be doing here in November. So we'll kind of have an opportunity to talk with the owner, one of the owners of Bridgford, and the rest of the team, just to see what direction they may want me to go at that point.
Fantastic. Well, Joe, we are really looking forward to watching you finish out the year. Best of luck to you at Clear Lake, and then particularly at the championship in Kentucky.
I appreciate it, Gary. Thank you so much. And Jimmy, as always, I always appreciate your friendship and on all the opportunities. This podcast is obviously a great opportunity for me to share my story and my testimony, and obviously, share with my sponsors and some of my success with other anglers.
Well, and I'm going to tell you, Joe, I mean, our relationship goes back quite a few years, even before we knew each other really well. I got used to seeing the bow of your boat. I'll never forget. I'll tell a quick story real quick. It goes back to Havasu in that 2007 season in the Guard Series, and I was working a little hump, and I had a couple of little areas that I was fishing that I thought I had this thing all figured out. And here comes you in your Ranger, and you kind of snuck on in and made a cast well respected. I mean, it wasn't even in, and basically shoplifted 3 fish right off the edge of this thing that I would have never casted to. And I'm like, man, that little assassin right there. And you've always been nothing but friendly. And we've developed a relationship over the years through fishing. And again, I really appreciate you coming on Fish Recon on short notice. You're a great friend and a great ambassador for the sport of bass fishing, but also so much more for fishing in general. You got a great story to tell, and you're an advocate for children, and we just love having you on. And we obviously, Gary and I wish you the best the rest of the way. I know there's great things for you to come. Wherever you land, you'll be great. And I just appreciate it very much, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
And that concludes this week's episode of Fish Recon Podcast. Special thanks to Joe Uribe Jr. for joining our show. Special thanks to our listeners. And hey, guys and gals, if you are out there and you are close to Arizona and you are looking for a new Ranger boat, I highly suggest you come see Joe Uribe at Cabela's. He will hook you up. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Check us out on the World Wide Web, www.fishrecon.com. Follow us on Instagram, Fish Recon Podcast. Facebook and YouTube, both the same name, Fish Recon. And if you are a fan of the Twitter and you tweet, you can find us there. Until next episode, folks, tight lines and bent rods.
I have a very particular set of skills. Skills I have acquired over a very long career. Skills that make me a nightmare for fish like you. I will look for you. I will find you. And when I do, I will catch you.
Big fish, big fish.
All the way in the bottom. All the way in the bottom.
Oh my god!
Look at that fish.
Yes!
Oh my gosh.
Dude.
Oh my gosh.
Dude, he's a monster.